So, question one. As a prospective MP, what is the legacy you would like to see left for the next generation and those beyond?
I think using the word legacy is a really key part of that question. I mean, I, as a young politician, get asked a lot, why did I go into politics? And for me, it was because I didn't want to make decisions that were just about the next 3 years. We've done that in politics far too often, and I think suffered the consequences of that. I think this election and politics in general has to be about decisions for future generations. It's not about the next 3 years, it's about the next 30 years. And I want to go away from politics feeling like I put in place the kinds of frameworks for our environment that are going to leave New Zealand better than I guess when I came into politics, better than when I found it.
Very nice. What risks do you think climate change poses to the well-being of young people and the future generations of New Zealanders?
Yeah. I think climate change and issues of the environment alongside economic issues combined, because I think they're actually intrinsically linked. I think those are probably the biggest challenges that our generation and the generation that follow me will face. And at the moment, I think those in politics, I think we're failing that generation. I know that it's very easy just to talk about climate change in grand terms in ways that don't affect our individual daily lives, but you only need to fly as far as Kiribati to see that for people who live there, their very being is threatened by climate change. This is not just an amorphous thing. This is something that I think is going to affect the way we live our lives.
Yeah, very good. If I can just adjust...
Do you need me to move?
No, you're good. Just adjust the camera upward. Just, okay. So we're missing about an inch of your forehead. But okay. Beautiful.
You're right? Okay, yeah. I won't slump or...
Oh no, yep, no, you're doing well.
You're right.
We've got enough headroom now.
You've got, okay.
Literally. Fantastic. Nice angle. Okay, policy questions.
Yep.
Do you think that the action New Zealand's government is currently taking on climate change is sufficient and does justice to our future generations? Yeah. If not, what goals and actions would you push for the next term if elected?
Yeah, my view on the emissions trading scheme is at the moment it's sending all of the wrong signals to polluters. The scheme as it currently stands, the way it's set up, means that at the moment you and I are subsidising heavy polluters. I think it's more important actually that an emissions trading scheme shouldn't be just there to make sure that we're buying and trading, but to give fiscal incentives and disincentives to people to make sure that they actually act to reduce their emissions overall. So I do think the ETS needs to change. We need to bring in agriculture because at the moment that's contributing to almost half of our emissions, and the fact that it's excluded means that I think our trading scheme at the moment is simply symbolic, and it doesn't mean that we're all sharing the burden of making sure that we change the way we behave and address climate change.
In your opinion, is the ETS in its current form an equitable system that delivers sufficient economic signals to its emitters? What changes would you advocate to make it more effective, if any?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that at the moment the way that the ETS is structured, it's not sending the right price signals to the industry. It's allowing carbon to be limited in terms of its price, and also the way that the units are traded means that as a heavy polluter, you've really got no incentive to try and reduce your overall emissions. And that is going to come at a cost to taxpayers, to the next generation, of an estimated $50 billion. And that's crazy that we should be picking up that kind of cost, when in fact the whole scheme exists surely to try and change the way that we all behave. So it does, the ETS does need to change, and that's certainly something that Labour's advocating.
Thank you. And what sort of changes would you advocate to make?
Again, the way that the units are traded by heavy polluters, and the fact that carbon prices are capped, again, because that doesn't allow the market forces to really just come down and change the way that those heavy polluters are behaving. Because why would you change what you're emitting if ultimately actually you hit your ceiling and then the government simply steps in to pick up the rest for you? It doesn't change behaviour.
What are your opinions on the expansion of the fossil fuel industries such as coal and lignite mining, oil and gas exploration in New Zealand? Do you personally support the call for a 10-year moratorium on new coal and lignite developments?
Labor released its environment policy on Sunday, and we were very specific about lignite. This is a proposal that's being put forward by Solid Energy. This is a state-owned enterprise. It is within the government's realm to be able to say to that state-owned enterprise, we don't believe that lignite is the way of the future for New Zealand. In fact, it will contribute to 20% of our emissions going forward if we proceed with this. It's a crazy proposal. Labor would tell its state-owned enterprise, if in government, that we would not pursue lignite and Solid Energy should not be pursuing lignite. But this government hasn't done that, and it is certainly within their powers to do so if they were going to show some leadership on this issue. Sadly, they haven't. When it comes to oil and gas exploration, I think we have to acknowledge that, these are finite resources. New Zealand's economic future will not exist solely around oil exploration. Now, at the moment, we haven't done enough to explore some of the alternatives to our dependency on oil, and we have to start sending the right market signals for that to happen. Things like encouraging fuel suppliers to make sure that they supply biofuels as an option, encourages R&D in that area. Sadly, as soon as the national government came in, they got rid of all of the work that we'd done on biofuels. And so, again, it's about putting in place the right frameworks, the right incentives, and making sure that we start moving towards a more sustainable future and move away from our oil dependency.
What do you see as the main future sources of energy for electricity, transport and heating for New Zealand? Do you support the call for the government to create an action plan to attain 100% renewable energy by 2050?
Yeah, I think that New Zealand's extraordinarily well placed to start branding itself as the country that's going to move towards 100% renewable. We're small enough, we have the resources, it's totally within, I think, our capabilities to aspire to that. Labor as a stepping stone has said we want to work towards 90% because we think that's absolutely attainable. For us, though, it's about making sure that you're putting in place the right indicators that that's where you're going. We have put in place a moratorium on any new generation that involved fossil fuels, so coal, for instance. Again, that was one of the first things that the national government scrapped when they came in to government, as well as gutting the ETS and removing all the work that had been done on biofuels. Why would we step backwards when we know what's at stake when it comes to our climate? So we want to put back in place those really aspirational goals.
Do you think the government should be doing more to promote research, development and deployment of low-carbon and more sustainable technologies and practices in New Zealand? And if so, what?
Yeah, I absolutely agree again that it fits so well within our clean green image, but I do want to highlight that at the moment it is an image, and if we are going to uphold it, we do need to start, I think, investing in areas that shows that we will actually be world leaders when it comes to clean tech and alternative forms of energy generation. Now, how do we try and create an environment where that happens? Well, Labor is really keen to make sure that the private sector is incentivised to start doing work in that area, and I think there are two ways to do that. One, you start putting in place the kind of frameworks that says, well, this is where we're going. Actually, we're going to compel our industries to start heading down this track by saying we're going to have 90% renewables, by saying we've got to have biofuels on offer, and also by putting in the right indicators that that's what has to happen. So, for instance, if you bring in agriculture into an ETS scheme and we all have to start paying for it, that creates a pretty big incentive for us to start innovating. But we've also set up funds that are targeted specifically at areas like that. New Zealand's got almost 50% of its emissions coming from agriculture. Other countries eventually will be bringing agriculture into their schemes. Why not lead the way on some of the innovative ways to start reducing emissions from the agricultural sector? And the second way we can help is by bringing in things like a research and development tax credit. And Labor says that it would bring that in at 12.5%, so that any industry working in this area would have a financial incentive to do so too.
Do you perceive New Zealand's dependence on oil as a risk to our economy in the age of high and increasing oil prices? Do you support the reallocation of spending on new roads towards low carbon and public transport initiatives?
Yeah, I do think oil dependency makes any nation right now incredibly vulnerable. And this does have to be about what kind of choice we're providing people in Auckland and New Zealand when it comes to alternative forms of transport, for instance. 35% of Auckland City's emissions come from private car use. It is a health issue. But secondly, we will, I think, start to see people suffer energy-based poverty. You know, the fact that they won't be able to afford to get around, to get to their job, to commute. That has to compel us as legislators, I think, to start providing people with choice. It makes no sense with the price of oil and doing what it's doing and the fact it's a finite resource to spend $10 billion on new highways. And that's why Labor has said, for instance, in Auckland, we would much rather reprioritise money that's being spent on, for instance, the Puhoi to Wellsford Holiday Highway and put that money into the City Rail Link, a project that actually is a legacy project that will enable Auckland to build its public transport infrastructure for now and for the next generation.
What actions, if any, would you take in your electorate to enable your community to increase their understanding of climate change and to reduce their emissions and dependence on oil?
I think making sure that we've invested in local projects that will make it much, much easier for people to do their part on climate change is really key, and that's incumbent on us. Things like the City Rail Link and building better public transport infrastructure, improving cycling and walking options, because in the city a lot of people perceive cycling to be very, very dangerous, and we need to act to improve safety for them. But I think more broadly, issues around climate change are ultimately issues of human behaviour, and we've got to change an entire way of thinking when it comes to reducing our personal footprint as individuals living in a very urban environment. I went to an event recently called Tread Lightly, which was a caravan that was going to be used to educate our youngest New Zealanders on climate change issues. And I think that's incredibly important. When I was young, the big environment issue was the ozone layer. It was the use of chlorofluorocarbons and spray cans, CFCs. Climate change is a much broader issue now. It's about everything that we do in our daily lives and how we can just be much more personally responsible for our contribution. Education is such a key part of that, and that's why we would, for instance, make sure that Enviro Schools is boosted and back in place, because education has to be a part of our longer term vision for tackling climate change.